Hi, so I'm Jordan, and today I'm going to teach you how to cheat at learning Chinese. So, why should you listen to me? Well, you don't have to, but I got pretty good at Chinese pretty fast. So, I've been here for a year now, and taxi drivers say I sound like I'm 6 years old, which I'm proud of. I am somewhere between HSK 4 and 5, and feel like I've been pretty efficient at learning Chinese and taking advantage of the new tools that are out there. So I've also spent a ton of time learning how to learn, reading podcasts, and blog posts, and talking to more experienced Mandarin learners. So I don't have all the answers, but learning how to learn Chinese was my procrastination for a while. So I'm putting this presentation together to help you learn lessons I learned the hard way. So Mandarin. So you want to learn Mandarin? Well, it's fucking hard. It sucks. The parts of it that sucks at least. So there are no cognates, which is no fun. And reading is a nightmare. So you can't sound words out. So you have to spend a lot of time memorizing how to read stuff. But there are parts of it which aren't that bad. So words kind of make sense. You put two words together and the meaning just kind of lines up. Pronunciation, once you get past the tones, actually isn't that hard. So English and other Romance languages have hundreds of thousands of different sounds, but Chinese really just has 400. So it's hard at the beginning, but afterwards it gets more and more easy to get your pronunciation better and better. So there are also a ton of things in Chinese that there aren't in Romance languages. For instance, conjugations, tenses, articles, plurals, gender, cases, declinations, fixed sentence patterns, just kind of aren't here. So a lot of the headaches you may have had learning French or Spanish or German don't really come up when you're diving into Mandarin. So you have that to look forward at least. So why learn Chinese? Well, lots of people have different reasons, but for me, the key was that it really unlocked China. So just two stories of sorts of things I've been able to do here that wouldn't have been possible had I not invested the time in learning Mandarin. So first, just a small anecdote. I was in an airport and I was eating some French fries, and there was a little kid who was kind of looking at me like he really wanted to eat French fries, and but was clearly too shy to actually ask. So I started speaking to him in Chinese, and then he came over and started eating my French fries, and we became friends, and he drew me a drawing of him. Then another time when I was in Yunnan, in Dali, walking around, I heard some hip hop playing out of a club, realized it was a live performance, started talking to the performers, and ended up beatboxing for their like little rap freestyle. So these are the sorts of things which really aren't possible if you're living in China or traveling in China without the language. People just relate to you differently when you've put in some work to show that you're trying to really get your Mandarin somewhere functional. And Chinese people, even educated ones who have high levels of English, will relate to you differently, given that speaking in their native tongue, or even just knowing that you have spent time trying to understand their native language. So with that preface, let's jump into some of the tactics that you're going to want to use. So at the very beginning, when you learn a new language, particularly Chinese, a lot of folks talk to you about defining goals. And while that can seem pretty amorphous in your like freshman year of college or your first time moving to China, I wouldn't worry about that too much, particularly in your early time investing in the language. But two things that I think are really important, regardless of what your end goals are, is first, skip handwriting, and second, take advantage of technology of 21st century offerings. So handwriting is really something that's dying out here in China. Fewer and fewer people need to actually write every single character down. All that's really necessary now is being able to recognize characters, because what you can do is type with your phone or with your computer, and it makes the kind of ingestion process, which is really painful, learning how to create all of these, thousands and thousands of characters, sort of useless. The joke is that even Chinese people nowadays are forgetting, thousands of characters that they spent lots of time in their grade school investing in. So some Chinese teachers may tell you otherwise, but they're wrong, because they're not a foreigner who's trying to learn the language at an older age and doesn't have quite as much time to invest in learning characters as a 8-year-old Chinese kid would. So the other thing which is really exciting is that technology, apps, ways to track your progress are making Chinese easier than ever and more efficient and more fun than ever. So to just kind of stick to your textbook, which was probably written 10 or 15 years ago, when there's all this great stuff out there for you to learn from, really isn't the smartest way to go about going about learning Mandarin these days. So a few important principles to keep in mind before I jump into the actual programs you're going to want to using. First, and probably most importantly, is spaced repetition learning. So basically, the idea is that people forget things on a pretty regular curve, and as long as you review something right before you're about to forget it, you're going to remember it for a longer and longer time. So maybe when you were a kid and you had flashcards, you had a good pile and a bad pile, and the more you reviewed words, the more you would put them into one pile or the other. Nowadays, there are programs which kind of do this all for you, and not only give you flashcards, but also give you really interesting flashcards, but a lot more than you could fit on a 2x4 note card. So the key app is Anki. Anki is something that's freeware, that's available online. I'll be making another video later walking through how I use it. But basically what it does is allows you to create flashcards, track flashcards, and add whatever you want to your flashcards, be that colored pinyin, audio samples, grammar tips. And if you notice at the very bottom here, this is the backside of a flashcard. And based on how well I know this, I will see it either in 10 minutes, 4 days, 5 days, or 10 days. So what this does is basically keeps track of how you're learning these flashcards, and does the kind of organization of what you know and are about to forget for you. So whenever you're learning words or reviewing words, you're not reviewing words that are kind of a waste of time. You're reviewing the words just when you need to. You're not reviewing words that are too hard or too easy, but you're reviewing them just when you want to be, just when you want to be, to waste the least amount of time. So another important principle is language through progressive overload. So this is the analogy I think is best is kind of like a weightlifting one. So the idea is that in weightlifting, every time you go to the gym, you want to do a little bit harder and push your muscles a little more. So whether that's lifting more weight or doing an extra rep or two, you always want to be exceeding your current bounds, but not by too much, so that you hurt yourself or get overwhelmed. So living in this space where you are kind of comfortable with 90% of the Mandarin you're using, so that you can fit in this new knowledge in a way that it connects with what you've already learned is really important, both so that things aren't too easy and so that you don't get too discouraged, or you're learning information that can't easily be linked back to the grammar or to the words you already know. So when you're thinking about learning Chinese, try not to do things that are way too hard, or do things that are too far in your comfort zone, because either of those isn't really the optimal difficulty level you want for your Chinese. So next, really important to get down early in your Chinese study journey is Pinyin pronunciation and tones. So there's an Anki deck that I'll link to, which does a really good job of introducing it to you. But I also want to highlight this resource that Chinese Pod put together. And what it does is takes a really expert Pinyin and pronunciation tutor and walk through two language learners who are at a pretty low level and correct their mistakes. And I think watching this video was the real key to me. Though the other really good method for this is just trying to find a tutor one-on-one. While it may be if you're ever going to invest money in a tutor, I think right at the beginning, getting your pinyin and pronunciation right is a really good use of time to get that real time feedback based on what you're doing wrong. So another thing that's important are radicals. So radicals are what make up characters, and there are about 100 that are pretty critical right at the very beginning to make the squiggly lines that you may see in characters start to make more sense and to make it easier for you to make stories up in your head. So putting in the effort at the very beginning to learn the 100 most common radicals is a real key to speeding up that painful early, first few 100 hours or so in your Mandarin learning. So next, vocabulary by mnemonics is a really cool way to learn these first few 100 characters that are really going to be the hardest you'll ever have to learn. So I'll put 2 links up for the mnemonics, for learning more about mnemonics. But basically, the idea is taking parts of the characters and parts of the meaning and the radicals inside them, and building a whole story inside your head, which is, maybe a little, extreme or violent or smelly or sexy, so that it creates an image in your head which is hard to forget. By doing this guy Matteo Ricci, who is a Jesuit priest in the 1600s, blew Chinese scholars away, being able to memorize pages and pages of ancient Chinese text almost instantly. So a real great way to accelerate your learning through mnemonics. The next fantastic website I want to highlight is called All Set Learning Resources. It's a free wiki. It's a free wiki online, and much better than any textbook I've come across. It breaks down the various grammars in colloquial English, probably better than your Mandarin teacher, who isn't necessarily a native English speaker, can even do. And it also breaks down the different grammar types into 4 levels, A1, A2, B1, and B2. So once you kind of master the easiest grammar, you can go on to the other ones. And if there's an easy grammar you haven't quite learned yet, you can scroll through the easy sections and figure out whether or not you have any holes in your knowledge. So a really fantastic resource, and great to jump on. The way I generally learn new grammars is take a few sample sentences from this website and memorize them. So I have good patterns that I can then build off going forward. And their example sentences are really fantastic. Next, I want to walk through a few different not free resources, but really good resources nonetheless. So Chinese Pod is a app and also a website that you can listen to. They have lessons ranging from like total basic to pretty advanced. And what's good about their app is they have transcripts, and they link to all the grammar that's used in the article in the dialogues, and the dialogues are very native. So they're definitely Chinese that you'll hear in everyday life, not necessarily kind of very stilted stuff you might get in your textbook. Fluent U sort of does the same thing, except with video content online. italki is a really great way to find affordable Chinese tutors. Basically, it's a tutor marketplace. Tutors go for $10 to $15 an hour, and they're really good. You can take trial lessons and just chat with tutors on Skype. The Chairman's Bow is an app if you want to improve your reading. They have HSK level graded articles, so there are some easy, medium, and hard articles every day based on where you are. And the Zhongwen Chinese Chrome app is actually free, and I'm just going to give a quick demo of what it looks like. So basically, what you can do is mouse, if you're trying to read something online in Chinese, if you mouse over a word, it will tell you what it means. So if I'm going, and I don't know what this word is, I mouse over it, and it's like, oh, cool, Junzi. Now I know what is going on there, which is a great help if you're trying to incorporate more native, like online Chinese into your daily life. Next, I want to emphasize the utility of one-on-one tutoring. So what's great about one-on-one tutoring is, as I mentioned earlier, in that progressive overload idea, how you wanna have 90% of the Chinese be familiar, and only 10% be new concepts, new words, new grammar. And tutors can really keep you in that perfect zone. They also can tailor the Chinese to what you're interested in, so it's important not to get discouraged or bored. And if you're going through a textbook just with your teacher, the chapter may not be particularly interesting or have vocab that you might not care all that much about. Tutoring also, depending on where you find tutors, doesn't necessarily have to be all that expensive. So there are lots of opportunities to find tutors, like online, like with italki that I mentioned earlier, or in person on college campuses and whatnot. So another important thing when learning Chinese is to try to be around it as much as possible. So when you're not on that, tutoring or studying on your anki, you still want to have Chinese kind of going through your brain at all times. So how to do that? Basically, try to do the stuff you like to do, just do it in Chinese. So find TV shows if you like watching TV. Try to play basketball with Chinese people if you like playing basketball. Listen to Chinese language movies. Use Chinese apps. These sorts of things. Just whatever your hobby is, try to find a way to do it in Mandarin. Even if you don't really understand what's going on, it's good kind of hearing what you've learned before and getting reinforced, and hearing grammar you've learned in new ways, and words you've learned in different contexts that you wouldn't necessarily come up with on your own. The kind of passive learning that you get from doing immersion is really critical. But at the end of the day, I think it's important to recognize that learning Chinese is really hard. The State Department says it's like 3 to 4 times more difficult than what it would take to get the same level of fluency in a language like French or Spanish. So it's important to understand that this is a long game you're getting into, and the more the kind of mental health aspect to this is important. So not getting discouraged, trying not to take a day off, really getting studying Chinese to be a habit and not something you. And understanding that it's not a sprint where you need to study 7 hours one day, but really looking at it as more of a marathon and finding methods that are both useful but also pleasant and are things you enjoy. So a quote from Scholar Stage, which is a blog I like: "The most important trait of an ideal language learner is discipline. It takes discipline to devote all these hours to learning a new language, especially in the early stages when speaking is embarrassing, reading seems pointless, listening destroys confidence, and memorizing new vocabulary is unbearably tedious. For most people, grit is what carries them through." But what you can do is just try to make it as fun and as efficient as possible, so that early phase, before you can really start engaging with native content, native speakers, and just having kind of more interesting conversations by yourself on your own, is look after yourself in the beginning and make sure that you're really focusing on keeping a positive outlook. So the last thing, which I think is really important, is to not be afraid to put yourself out there. At the end of the day, you're probably learning Chinese to be able to talk and listen to Chinese people. And if you're too scared to do that, then your progress will retard. And even people, even if you put in a few years, at the end of the day, if you're kind of not using your language, it's a bit of a waste. So one of the cool things about learning a new language is you can adopt a new personality. So maybe say you were more shy and introverted in your native language, but while learning Chinese, you can look at this as an opportunity to get out there and have more sorts of conversations. One of the fantastic things about learning Chinese in China is how encouraging Chinese people can be around you. You're constantly told how good you are and how impressive your Chinese is, and while that is can get a little annoying at times, at the same time, you'd be surprised at how patient a lot of Chinese people can be when starting a conversation and interacting with you. So really take advantage of that. Don't be afraid to make a fool of yourself. You're gonna sound silly. You're gonna make mistakes, but without the right attitude towards engaging with people, you'll never really actually learn. So With that, I just want to encourage you to get out there and have some conversations in Chinese.